Thank you so much for your cooperation. Tonight's book, Lady Tremaine, was not only a Reese Witherspoon pick, but also received the book industry equivalent of a restaurant's Michelin star, a star by Kirkus Reviews. And that's something that's essentially sets you up for life for the next one, and also puts you a lot of pressure on it too. But it's a well-deserved honor, but most prestigious in our eyes is it's going to be our co-owner Jen, who's back there. It's going to be her staff pick next month, so we're very proud of that. So thank you everyone for coming. So tonight's author, she grew up here in Santa Barbara, as we can see here, and she currently lives in Portland, Oregon, with her husband and 2 daughters. So to celebrate this rousing, successful first novel, Lady Tremaine, please welcome home Rachel Hochhauser.
Hello, everyone. I think it's a little silly to give an author a metaphorical microphone. I don't have one, but I'll do my best. I just wanted to start by talking about Chaucer's because I grew up a stone's throw from here. I could walk here. So I have a lot of childhood memories from this bookstore. And I think it was because of this bookstore and because supporting my reading habit got to be a little bit too expensive that I quickly became a library kid at the Santa Barbara Public Library. So it was between the 2 institutions that I give them both credit for my ability to write because I was reading so much constantly. And I still, when I'm writing, feel like I have like an internal metronome or cadence in my head that I'm trying to fit. And I think that comes from books that came from this very room. So it's an honor to be here. I'm really excited. It's kind of a personal milestone for me. So thank you for coming and being here with me and celebrating. I don't have a lot to say. I think I'm going to quickly turn this into a Q&A because I'm a writer, not a public speaker. But I thought I would tell you a little bit about the book and how it came about and where it came from. And unfortunately, it didn't have the happiest of origin stories in terms of the seed and spark of an idea. It started in a hospital of all places. My husband, Eric, who's here tonight, standing on 2 feet and very well, was not well at the time. In 2023, we had a really tough year. He had what we later found out was a brain abscess, and we were spending a ton of time in the hospital system here in Santa Barbara actually, and then up in Portland, and he eventually had emergency brain surgery, and it was just a really grueling recovery and stressful time, especially because we had an 18-month-old daughter and I was still attempting to work full-time and had to be trained as a home nurse and figure out how to insert an IV, and it was an ordeal. And one of the many hours spent in the hospital waiting rooms, I was scrolling on my phone, really sleep deprived and bleary-eyed, and I came across a depiction of Cinderella's evil stepmother, Lady Tremaine. And I was stopped in my tracks for 2 reasons. The first is that for the first time I learned she had a name, Lady Tremaine, which naming her made her a person. I had never heard it before. And the second was that for the first time in this season of sacrifice in my own life, I didn't feel like I was looking at a villain or someone motivated by self-interest or harming people. It was just a mother trying to take care of her children, which is the very thing that society tells women they're supposed to do as mothers. And what a horrible contradiction or tension for a person to be caught inside of. So I couldn't stop thinking about her. And that was the seed of the book. And I did what is a completely natural thing to do when your family's falling apart. I sat down and started writing a novel. I'm very happy to say that Eric's doing much, much better, and the story has a happy ending because I have this book as well. And we also have another daughter now. So all good things, although it would have been nice to have earned them in a different way. The story itself, we talk a lot about it, and I've had a few of these conversations and questions have come up, and people have been really interested in why I wanted to write a villain origin story. And for me, this is not actually a story about a villain at all. If you read it, I don't think you'll find Lady Tremaine to be a villain. What I really wanted to do was dismantle the Cinderella fairy tale altogether. So I call this an untelling, not a retelling, because I think as you get further along and into it, you know, the first half of the book, you are inside of a familiar fairy tale, but surprising things are happening at various plot points and turns. But then in the second half of the book, we undo and explode the whole thing altogether. And I don't want to have any spoilers, but I think that there's some satisfying payoffs as you get to the end. Another question I get a lot is about research for the book. But I very intentionally wanted the book to read not like a fairy tale, not like magic or what we think of as fantasy, but more like historical fiction set in a timeless world far, far away. So it, in some senses, it has a lot of nods to the traditional fairy tales that we know, but it's very heavily researched and informed by life in Western Europe a few hundred years ago. And I chose that setting because I thought that the Cinderella fairy tales that came out of Western Europe a few hundred years ago are the ones that inform our cultural understanding of the fairy tale. They're the ones that inform the Disney animated Cinderella movie that we all think about. And that the version of Cinderella in my head that I still, you know, live with and embrace as a kid, the version that's still playing. So I read diaries of women from the time. I read fiction, both written during and set during that time. And I think my favorite part was reading etiquette manuals for young women from a few hundred years ago. And there's an etiquette manual that plays a large role in this book. Those of you that have read it might recognize it as belonging to Ellen. And a lot of the truisms and tropes from that etiquette manual were real and taken from and paraphrased from real etiquette manuals from back then. The other aspect of this book that was pretty heavily researched was falconry, which is a big part of the storyline, and I don't know if you can't tell that I am not a falconer. I like to think that I give that off, but that's not a hobby I currently have. And the more I learned about it, I think the less likely it is, because it sounds incredibly laborious and time consuming. But really interesting. And so there, you know, that was informed by a falconry workshop that I took, reading old falconry manuals, watching YouTube videos, essentially doing whatever I could, including reading Helen Macdonald's H is for Hawk, which is a beautiful memoir. And if any of your interest in falconry is piqued by reading this, I recommend that as a follow-up read. It's beautifully written, and you'll find a lot of parallels between the way the books approach the sport. I'm going to finish with another common FAQ that I get, which is around the Ellen character and how I handled Cinderella, and then I'd love to open it up to questions if anyone has any. Hopefully someone does. And people are often curious about why I wrote the Cinderella character the way that I did. She is somewhat of a goody two-shoes. She's a little bit annoying. She's not a villain. And I thought it would be interesting to take the Cinderella character to her natural extreme. All of the traits we associate with Cinderella. So someone who is beautiful, someone who is nice, someone who is passive. Because if you think about Cinderella, she's quite passive. She, you know, doesn't even get herself to the ball. The fairy godmother does that for her. So the passivity becomes passive aggression. The niceness becomes, she's so nice that it's annoying. Because we all know someone who's so nice that it feels insincere. And I wanted to push her character into a more extreme symbolic version of femininity than she has represented in the traditional versions of the story. So I am an open book. I'm happy to answer questions about how it got published, inspiration, anything else, but help me out and help me fill up the minutes while I sit up on this stool. If anyone has any questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
Talk about your parents a little bit.
That's my father.
Do tell us the story of how it came to become the book that it is. You've told us what inspired you and what research you've done, but tell us the next steps that occurred.
Yeah, I'll go really far back in time to high school. I have a couple of my high school teachers here, which is exciting. And I always wanted to be a writer, and I would talk about it and say that, but in hindsight, it didn't translate to a lot of actual writing or words on the page. And so when I went to undergrad at NYU, I minored in creative writing because it wasn't available as a major. And I wanted to write, but I still was not writing a lot. And so eventually I decided to go to grad school, where I went to USC here in Southern California, and I wrote a novel. And then I rewrote it about 17 more times and couldn't sell it and couldn't get representation. And, you know, a number of years passed and I dramatically quit writing because I decided, I wasn't cut out for it. It wasn't happening for me. So by the time I got the idea for this book, I had a somewhat of a tenuous relationship with writing, but I couldn't put the idea down. So I decided to give it one more shot and take it really seriously, and I took a leave of absence from my day job of that time, and I wrote it 9 to 5 essentially, not actually, because it was really hard to write for 8 full hours a day, but I really wanted to give it a proper go. So I wrote it very quickly. I think the first draft the chunk of it was in under 5 months, but I would say the whole draft was probably about 8 months. And I had I would say a Cinderella story version of publishing this time around. And I don't say that lightly. I got multiple offers of representation for an agent. I sold the book on a preempt, which means it didn't even get a chance to go to auction. An editor makes an offer like quote unquote too good to refuse. And St. Martin's Press, my publisher, has championed the book. I'm have gotten Reese's mentioned, which has continued to help it. So I feel it's really important to answer that starting 20 years ago, because this road has been beautiful and lovely, but it feels hard won if you start at the beginning.
What was your first novel about?
I had the audacity to write about a marriage before I was ever married. But I don't think that's why it didn't work. Actually, the marriage scenes were very prescient. There was one, and the book opens with a wife upset with her husband because he never thinks to buy toothpaste. It's always her that's purchasing the toothpaste when they run out.
So are you going to revisit that one?
I don't think so. I think that it belongs firmly in history. It's part of my journey getting here.
But did you think you really faced changing Cinderella around on? Was there anybody, or were there just many people that you knew of that you felt could be that way?
The Cinderella character herself, or the main character?
I guess I'm the main character.
She's certainly not based on myself, but I would say of all the characters, I relate to her the most. So I think it was hard because I'm a parent and I have young daughters, and it's a book in some senses about parenting. It's hard to separate my value system from those that inform the main character. Yeah.
If your book got picked up for a movie adaptation, I'll say when it does, who would you cast as Lady Tremaine?
Good question, and I'm totally off record here, in a room full of people. I would say I had Rebecca Ferguson in my mind. She's in Dune and Silo. She's the mother in Dune. And I had Rose Byrne. I'm probably saying her last name wrong. Someone who has a lot of ferocity to them and strength, but also elegance.
In the book, there's clearly your untelling, but then there are also, if you've watched the Disney movie, very clearly reworkings of scenes that are like directly from the movie. Can you talk about sort of like why that was important to you, and like how, like, did all of those scenes make it in, and like how did that work with sort of the editing process?
Yeah, I grew up enthralled with Cinderella. We had a bootleg VHS version that was stolen from my mother's friend Ivan, I believe. And I watched it a ton, and I went through a phase where I had a book version that I had to read every night. So I would say Cinderella was very imprinted on me from a young age and informed my perspective on happy endings and fairy tale endings. And then of course, as I got older, I really engaged with Ella Enchanted as a tween, which was a great, YA book. I loved the Hilary Duff movie. I loved Ever After with Drew Barrymore. But when I sat down to work on this, I didn't want to rewatch anything or engage with anything, and I intentionally avoided everything except for reading the antique fairy tales from a while back. But that doesn't mean I wasn't in a constant conversation with the version of Cinderella that was in my mind, which was mostly informed by the Disney movie, but of course had these other inputs. So I think it had to do with trying to dismantle the versions and the scenes that were stamped in my own subconscious, and so it's really a personal journey. But I feel like the feedback I've been getting is that Cinderella is a personal journey for many women all over, and so that's the part that this feels relevant, not just to me, I hope, but to a lot of
I will
people.
say the reworking of the dress tearing scene is
Thank
one of
you.
my favorites.
I'm wondering if you have watched the last season of Bridgerton.
I haven't. I think I need to, but I've been waiting. I think I'm gonna wait until the book tour is over, till I have a lot
It's
of
quite
distance.
speaks to this exact
Yeah,
thing.
I keep
and it's
hearing that.
a great retelling of the story.
I could not have predicted. Actually, a Bridgerton actress narrated the book, so there is a little bit of the audio version.
Which
She
one?
did a great job. Yeah. So,
Which actress?
her name's Bessie Carter. She plays. I think her name is
Bessie
Prudence.
Who?
Jesse Carter.
Prudence. She plays Prudence. Thanks.
She's yes.
So you talk about how you grew up loving Cinderella, Ella Enchanted, those are like the princesses, and you kind of talked about how like the reason why your mother and things like that, but why would you choose her? Like what made you engage with like essentially the woman of the girl you grew up loving?
I think it was twofold. I think one, at a certain point when you have little girls, you start to think about the messages you're feeding them and the media you're giving them and what you're saying to them. And Disney princesses in my peer set are, I don't want to go so far as just to call them problematic. I have a little girl who loves being a princess, and I'm very, if she wants to wear a ball gown, I'm all for it. It's all about personal expression. But I've had to think about, what version of being a princess I want to encourage. And Cinderella always sat less comfortably to me because you don't have a character that has a lot of agency, and you also have basically a happy ending that comes as a result of her being picked by not really talking, just in one night, just with showing up at a ball in a beautiful gown, and then everything's happy because they get married. And so that's something that was back of mind. And then when I had my hospital revelation about this character, it just felt natural to me to enmesh the two as I was kind of picking at the story and figuring out how I wanted to reweave those different threads.
This is kind of like a two-part question. First, what do you think your main message would be? Because you said you have two daughters, that you want to give them a good message. And the second part of the question would be, who would you say the message is mostly for? Do you think it's more for everybody, or for mothers specifically, that are pastors and parents such as you?
So when I wrote the book, my thought on the audience, I'm gonna answer it backwards, second part first, was that it's a book mostly for women, but I have been very surprised by the number of men that have read it and gotten in touch with me to say that they enjoyed it. So I don't ever want to exclude anyone from enjoying the book. I think that's been really nice. But I don't think it's women that have children. I think I've found that it's all women, all people who identify as women and maybe have been impacted by these messages that have really resonated with the book. And as far as the core message of the book, I don't want to skirt around answering, but I would say it's the last paragraph of the book, which I don't want to give away, and you have to read the whole thing to get there because it pays off better when you get there. But it's a message about finding your own, inner strength and heartbeat, so to speak.
I want to know a little bit more about your writing process. I was her English teacher, She was always very meticulous, and I just clearly remember your handwriting like being like this, and you would work so hard. And so I knew already that you were very far along.
You
But
would be so disappointed how sloppy it is. My writing process is all over the place. I mean, the bigger answer is I just try and put my butt in a chair for a couple hours a day and incrementally inch it forward. And it's work, and it's not, divine inspiration. I wrote my way in based off of gut and intuition, like a third of the way into the book, and then I sat down and I outlined, and that was probably the moment that you would have recognized when I had my, sticky notes and red strings, and I had it all over the floor of my office. But then, once I had that blueprint, I just had to force myself to do it a certain amount of minutes per day.
what were some of like really arduous, hard parts that you had to wrangle with and work with?
Plot doesn't come super easily for me, and I think that was when we talked about what didn't work about my first book. It really lacked an interesting plot, or I'd say a commercially viable plot. It had really nice sentence level writing. So I had to completely reframe my relationship of what makes a book. From instead of starting granular and working outwards, I had to start with the, how you build a house. You figure out the framework of it before the interior decorating.
Thank you.
Speaking of your process, having experienced what you did prior and failing, when you got to this project, was there a moment where you felt that it was actually working, or a moment of realization, or was it just a long grind that you just slowly kept writing and came through for you?
My explanation of what it feels like to be a writer is you have 4 days of hating yourself, and then on the 5th day you decide you're a golden god, and then you start over again. So I would say it was like that the whole way through.
Yeah. What about after, as far as your reaction to the response from Kirkus, from Reese and everything? Was it believable to you when it was happening?
I still think a part of me is waiting for the other shoe to drop. I feel extraordinarily grateful. The golden god percentage of my personality is, of course, like, yes, continue, throwing roses at my feet. But no, for the most part, I mean, I think it's something I wanted for so long, and most importantly, it means I can keep doing it. That's the number one thing. It's not just about checking it off now. It means I get to write more books, and that is something I could not put to words how badly I wanted that.
Awesome.
I think you mentioned you had a 2-book deal.
That's my husband.
Are you working on a second book, and would you be willing to share any rough details about what it's about?
My second book is set in Santa Barbara in 1862, and I won't share about the plot, but it has involved a lot of research into what was happening in Santa Barbara a while back. So that's been really fun. I'm poking around in some archives here in town.
How was the rewriting process? You mentioned the first time you rewrote it like 17 times.
Oh, I was very lucky with this one. The rewrites were really light. Really, that's not the case for my second book, so I don't think that's, that was sort of a fluke, but it was mostly line level edits.
Can I make a comment about that? If I
My
have
mother.
this the publisher told you that they'd never gotten a first draft manuscript that they didn't have to edit as well as you.
Thanks, Mom.
Let's take a couple more questions.
How were you able to enter into the psyche of the stepmother?
I started with her. I think that was the initial thing I had to get over in order to start the book itself. So once I was writing, I already knew who she was, and I was writing in first person from her voice. So I think I had the first few sentences I ever wrote down, above and beyond just jotting down what the idea for the book was. I knew viscerally who she was and what her personality was, and it's very clear. She's a very clear-cut person. When you read the book, you get a sense of her, and that was the only thing I had to go off of when I first started working on the book, was just her.
Thank you.
Yeah.
You did a great job giving her a wonderful, very interesting personality.
Thank you.
One last question before we sign books.
Were there any interesting clarifications or epiphanies that sort of fell out of the creative process of pulling together a world around this psyche?
Do you mean in my own life or within the structuring of the book?
Both.
I think the biggest epiphany for me in my own life has been the difference between being a writer and an author. They're very, very different jobs. So I feel like I'm an intern in a new industry, and that's been really fun because I didn't appreciate being a junior or an intern, first go around, however many years ago. This time I'm soaking it all in and asking a million questions. And as far as the book, I would say a lot. I tend to write my way into discovering a story or a character, and then I have an idea and I have to go back to the beginning and weave it in. But some of the biggest moments in the book, the dramatic climax, the whole sacred storyline and backstory, were not a part of my initial idea for the books. They all came later.
Rachel Hochhauser, thank you for sharing Lady Tremaine.